It's my pleasure to welcome Les Rubin. He is the author of a couple of books, but the one I want to focus on today is The Greatest Ponzi Scheme on Earth. No, that's not the book. That's our system and how the US can avoid economic collapse. There are three main elements that we want to talk about as far as this Ponzi scheme. And let's go ahead and dive in. Les, welcome. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Jason?
Good to have you. Good to have you. So, those three main areas that the book focuses on, what are those?
Well, the areas of problem that we have to address is you start with entitlements, which are completely broken. Government officials don't want to touch it because it's politically taboo, but there are ways to reform entitlements without hurting the beneficiaries, and we deal with that in the book. The size of government, you go back to what was originally intended by our founding fathers. It was a limited government, and they had specific duties assigned to the federal government in the Constitution. Everything else, according to Amendment 10 to the Constitution, was for the states or the people. Well, that's not what we have today. Our founding fathers would roll over in their graves if they saw the mess we made of our federal government and the enormous debts we're taking on and the ridiculous spending levels that we have with deficits as far as the eye can see. So we have to look at how we can get the size of government down. And then we have a muddled tax code that is ridiculous. Even the tax professionals have to look up everything. I think it's 10,000 pages of gobbledygook.
Oh, it's more than that, but yeah, absolutely.
Whatever, it's enormous. I can only remember back in the old days when President Carter said we need to put a match to the tax code and start over. Well, I would agree with him.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. When we talk about entitlements, I've had Lawrence Kutlikoff on the show a couple of times, and he's done a lot of deep research into the forward looking obligations of entitlements over the next 10, 15 years. And, there's disagreement on this, but it's anywhere from 60 to $220 trillion, most would say. And these are just unfunded. There's no way we can pay for this except to inflate away the obligation. You can't tax enough to cover this problem. But let's just dice into this entitlement issue first.
Well, the unfunded obligations, according to the CBO, are $78 trillion. That's over a horizon of 75 years. And yes, if we keep on keeping on, there's no way we can pay that. So we have to dig down deep and to try and see what the problem is. Well, we have a demographic problem today. There are 2.6 people working for every person on retirement. When we started the system, it was 30, 40, 50 people working for everybody. So we got too few people pulling the cart. That won't work. And the Social Security Trust Fund and the Medicare Trust Fund both exhaust in about 10 years. And if we do nothing, the current law says you have to cut benefits to match the income, and that means 24% cuts for Social Security across the board and 11% on Medicare. So what do we do is the question.
That doesn't seem like that'll be very politically popular to do those types.
No,
Right?
we know what the politicians are going to do. They're going to
Yep.
change the law to keep paying out benefits. And
Yep.
that just makes our debt problem worse. And that's the focus of the Ponzi scheme book. There are solutions to this. And I propose one in our book, which is converting Social Security to private accounts, which I think is by far the best solution. There's a problem doing that because the capital cost of the conversion. So in my program, which I'm getting modeled right now, I have a 20-year conversion with a slowly moving from required into the trust fund into your own account that you would own yourself. And so over a transition period, we would get to the point where everybody owned their own asset and they would retire whenever their assets were adequate to fund a income stream for them for the rest of their life. So that's one approach. There's many
Okay,
others.
so let's just talk about that one for a moment. So first of all, I can't imagine the politicians wanting to give up control of, the Social Security system like that. And of course, what they'll say is, well, we need to protect people, and we need to protect people from themselves to some extent, right? Because if someone mismanages their account, just like if they mismanage their IRA, right, then the system, ostensibly has to somehow solve their problem later, right? If they're living for today with instant gratification and blowing all their money, somehow society is going to end up covering that, aren't they?
The first thing I say in my program is you cannot cut current benefits, and you can't. But that means some trade-offs in the program to get there. Does the government want to give up control? No, they never want to give up control. Power is what it's all about in Washington.
Right.
So that's what Main Street Economics is trying to reach out beyond the political class to the voting public, if you will, the concerned citizens of the country, because if we can get them educated to the problems that we have and the future that is not pretty, and you'll see that if you take a few minutes to look at our website, then maybe we can alert the citizens to the problem in time to get some pressure on Washington. I think it was Lincoln that said it best. It says, with public support, you can get anything done. Without it, you can get nothing done. So we have to get the public on board with this.
All right. So entitlements, we talked about retirement or Social Security, but what about all of these promises the government has made? I mean, I, for one, have never seen so many people collecting disability benefits from the government. How did a generation of people become disabled like this? It's just fake. These claims are fake, many of them. How do you cut back on benefits? I mean, look, the left side of the political aisle and the right side to a lesser degree, they've just bought off the voters with promises of goodies.
Well, there's a very prophetic quote that I found from someone no one has heard of. His name is Alexander Tytler. And he forecasts what's going. This was 200 years ago. He was a Scotsman, judge, and a historian. And he said, democracy cannot succeed as once people discover that they can vote themselves largesse from the government. After that, you're doomed to failure in a fiscal morass. And unfortunately, that's exactly what's happening. The politicians are professional politicians. They're not statesmen anymore. They're professional politicians. They have a job and they want to keep it.
This is one reason we need term limits so badly.
Term limits would be great if you could get it through. That's the challenge.
Yep.
But we need the public to understand the problem if we're ever going to fix it. And that's what I'm trying to do through Main Street Economics. We have a number of videos that we're producing right now that we're going to be starting into public domain sometime in the next 30 days. But the public has to understand the problem. It's not just Social Security, it's Medicare, it's Medicaid. Those three entitlements, if you will, lose the federal government $1 trillion plus every year. Mm-hmm. You have to fix those, and you have to lower the size of government if we're going to get in balance, because a smaller government will lead to better growth in our economy. And the logic for that is pretty clear. The less government takes out of the public economy, the more that's left in the public economy to invest and grow and make a better standard of living for all of us.
No question. But the person who's receiving the benefits, the person on Section 8 housing vouchers, for example, they're never going to vote themselves out of their own benefits. It's just never going to happen.
No, I'm not going to reach 100% of our voters. There's no way that'll happen. But if I can get to 10 to 20% of informed voters, I think that's enough to make a difference. The incentives are backwards in Washington. They incentivize people doing the wrong thing. The best example of that is the war on poverty. Even though they had good intentions, what happened in the war on poverty, instead of bringing people out of poverty into independence, we've created a whole society of dependence. We've spent $25 trillion and we haven't lowered the poverty rate at all. So the people in Washington don't get it right. They have their incentives backwards, and incentives are the most powerful force in the world.
Well, and one problem with those incentives is you look at a program like Aid to Families with Dependent Children, and politicians, especially on the left, know that if you bust up families, single people tend to vote leftward leaning. No question about that, especially single women, especially single women mothers. You give them the benefit of the doubt and you say, well, they had good intentions. I don't know that any of these intentions are good. I think these intentions are just a power grab. We just see this continuing and continuing, like you mentioned with the incentives. So, what do we do? I mean,
Well,
I don't see how this really gets fixed until you have a collapse type of scenario, because no one will ever vote themselves out of their own pocketbook.
no, people vote their pocketbooks. There's no question about that. And I was being kind by saying they had good intentions.
I agree.
I don't
You
know
were
if they
being too
did or not.
kind. Yeah.
I won't swear to that, but nevertheless, what they've done is they've created a bureaucracy that wants to give away as much as possible, and that's to curry favor with voters. And the people that are getting the benefits of that are not going to change, and they're not going to vote to do away with that. And I don't know that we want to do away with welfare altogether, but we need to make it for the needy and the people that really deserve it, not everyone. And that's what's happened, and why we've created a whole society of dependents. And you're right, they're not gonna vote for some rational change. But if we can alert enough of the public to the problems, they will be alarmed if they see the facts. And we have a pamphlet that's free on our website that's only about 25 pages that I co-authored with the former Comptroller General for the United States, Dave Walker. And we describe that in some detail and some solutions. It's not as detailed as the Ponzi scheme book, but it would be a good overview, and that's available free on our website, mainstreeteconomics.org.
You wrote a book strictly about economics, right? Rather than specifically the Ponzi scheme we're talking about. Where does this lead if it takes another 10 years or another forever to get going in the right direction here? Do we just see massive inflation? We've got a debt increasing at the rate of almost $4 trillion per year now. Where does this lead?
Well, if we stay on the course we're on, and that's the whole theme behind what I'm doing, if we stay on this course, we are going to crash and burn, and we are going to disappear as a country as we have known it. There will come a time when the Ponzi scheme fails, and the only way we can finance our growing debt and expenditures is to borrow money. Well, when we can no longer borrow money, that means the Ponzi scheme has failed. And that's a collapse of this country economically and a destruction of our whole monetary system. If that happens to us, it's not just our problem, that's a worldwide problem. And that'll be catastrophic if we let that happen.
Borrow in terms of what? Selling treasuries at our treasury
Well,
auctions?
the way we finance our deficits is to sell treasuries.
Yeah.
This year, it will take approximately $10 trillion of debt sales to pay off the rolling over debt that matures, which is about 8 trillion, and the deficits, which is about 2 trillion. So we have to sell $10 trillion worth of bonds, and the demand for those bonds is weakening as foreign investors are liquidating. Our biggest holders were China and Japan. They were both over $1 trillion. They're liquidating. They're going down, and so is the Federal Reserve is not buying like it used to. So you have a convergence of increasing supply of debt and a decreasing demand. And we all understand supply and demand curves. That's not a good scenario. At some point, we're going to run into we can't sell our debt to anybody but the Fed. And when you sell debt to the Fed, that's printing money and that's inflation.
So, how bad will the inflation get?
Well, that depends on the policy. Right now, they're having trouble getting inflation under control, and they're trying for this so-called soft landing where we get inflation under control without a recession. I think they're smoking something, but bottom line is the way you get inflation under control is to decrease aggregate demand. Supply and demand is what it's all about. So in order to do that, you almost have to raise interest rates and create a recession to do that. If they don't follow that prescription, and I don't think they're going to raise interest rates politically, that might not fly, but I don't think you're seeing any reductions either. And slowly, the high mortgage rates and the high interest rates are starting to slow the economy. There's a lot of underlying data that says that that's happening right now.
I agree with that. And it just makes the economy anemic and puts us into this sort of stagflation scenario. Anything else you can tell us about the future of the economy based on what's going on? I mean, I hope you're right, and I hope we see some change, but it
If
is not looking
if we
likely.
don't if we don't get the public aware of the problems and put some pressure on Washington to fix the problem, I don't know where it ends, but it's ugly. And I don't know how much time we have. Nobody can predict that. But my swag, no, I'll call it a wag. It's a wild ass guess. It's 10 years or less before we really have to start dealing with monumental problems and the road to failure if we don't fix the problems. I'm writing a pamphlet now that's even shorter, and it's called Failure is Our Option, and we are choosing it by default.
Mhm.
Because we're not dealing with the problems, and we will fail if we don't deal with the problems. And that's my fear for me, you, our kids, our grandkids, and all future generations. It's going to be dramatically worse if we don't fix these problems now.
Yeah, no question about it. Les, give out your website.
It's mainstreeteconomics.org.
MainStreetEconomics.org. Les Rubin, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me, Jason.